Hi there, this is Clare Bowditch. How you doing? You're listening to 3SER, KC Radio, Retrospectives program.
Talk about the trip to Germany first, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
How did life agree with you in Germany?
We had this dream a few years ago when we went over touring with Art of Fighting that we would return to Berlin and live there for a little while because we just loved it as a city. We'd been to lots of places in Germany, but Berlin was the place that kind of seemed super cool to us. So we finally were able to do that this year, and so we have this kind of idea that if we can get ourselves over there. There was no real fixed reason. We were doing a 1 month tour with Gautier, but the main thing was just to have a kind of creative adventure with no fixed outcome. And it was just wonderful. We went over, we lived, we took obviously the whole family over, and Asher went to a bilingual school there, and we lived quite centrally in a place called Prenzlauberg, but I had a studio in Kreuzberg where I wrote a new album, and it was fantastic. And we're planning to go back in June again this year.
You wrote some songs over there. Did you find it an inspiring environment to write in?
I think it's an incredibly inspiring environment. First, from a writer's point of view, just to be away from everything that's familiar, and especially in a country where there's no language, it puts you right back in your into different senses. So suddenly you're hearing. And your observational skills become incredibly important again, and that's an important part of any kind of storytelling profession. So for that reason, it's really fantastic and inspiring. And for another reason, it's just the city itself, the history and the people, and not the kind of thing that you get to encounter that often in Coburg, in the kind of surrounds of Thornbury, or there's an amazing amount of history there, but it's a different. When you're in Berlin, you're seeing bullet holes in facades, and you're speaking with people who are of ages to have seen the kind of horrors that we've learnt about in history class all those years, and also younger people who've seen the fall of the wall, who've lived on either side, or those who've never known, but were born after that time. There's just so much going on all the time. It's so incredible in that way.
I believe you rediscovered the piano while you were over there.
Yes, I did. I rented out this apartment, this kind of studio apartment in Kreuzberg, and it turns out it was owned by a chap called Mocky, a producer called Mocky, who'd produced Feist, the Reminder album, and worked with Gonzalez and Peaches. It's kind of really interesting dude, and so it was this lovely coincidence that his was the house I rented, and I rented it because it had this funky old, piano. It was so old it had a kind of ragtime feel to it, and I spent a lot of time in there. And since coming home, I've actually started having piano lessons with a really great Melbourne jazz musician called Andrea Keller, who you might know of. Mm-hmm. So I've been re-inspired to pick up the instrument again.
Now, while you were away, you picked up the Young Woman of the Year award, the Yen Young Woman of the Year award. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, apparently. I don't really know how these things work, but I knew that I'd been nominated for this Yen Young Woman of the Year, and there are a whole lot of different categories. So it was the music category that I won, which is a great honour. I was nominated along with Sarah Blasco and Julia Stone, two women who are inspiring to me. It was pretty. I think it's been a real eye opener to see the other nominated women in their different fields, and just how much. I don't know. I'm a sucker for being inspired by other people's stories, and so I loved going on the adventure of having won that, and then getting to know some of these other women's stories. But I think it's just one of those lucky things. It was peer vote. No, it wasn't peer voted. It was reader voted. So it was an honour, because I reckon Yen's a really cool magazine, actually.
Mm. Just going right back, Claire, when did songwriting kick in for you? When did you find that you had that urge to create in that way?
Well, I think I'm quite common in this way, that I just always wrote songs when I was a kid, and the way I always think about it is that for some reason I continued to think that that was important and fun, and kept wanting to do it, and then just continued on. So really my first recorded songs are from when I'm 3 and 4, and I think I started thinking of it more as something that I seriously enjoyed and needed to do in my late teens and early 20s. So it's been quite a while.
I believe you studied ethnomusicology at one stage?
I did. I was lucky to do this course in Melbourne called the Bachelor of Creative Arts. So that was it. In the years that I did it, we were able to do some VCA subjects at Victorian College of the Arts and Melbourne University subjects as well. And I majored in writing but did music and theatre and other things on the side. And as part of that course, my girlfriend Jessie and I got a scholarship to go over to Canada and study at the University of British Columbia. And there I was fortunate enough to just be in a place where there was this professor, Michael Tenzer, who's this fantastic ethnomusicologist, and he was running postgraduate courses, and I had to beg, borrow and kind of steal my way into those courses because I had absolutely no qualifications except some knowledge of music, but I'd never studied ethnomusicology before. And that was a year of quite intense study on the subjects, and yeah, very, very influential for me, just the people and the discussions that we had in that course, because mainly we were talking about music, its relevance in everyday life and in our culture and other people's cultures, and just arguing about those points. And it was just at the point where Napster were starting to make headlines. I think it was 2000, 2001 maybe. And so we were just in the burgeoning, digital age, and everything was starting to change, and we were talking and thinking about what this would mean for the future. So yeah, it was, as well as studying sub-Saharan African rhythms and, gamelan and other kind of interesting music that's very much tied to everyday cultural life. So pretty fascinating stuff.
Do you think the music you're making now would be different had you not done those studies?
I have no doubt, actually. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the last album, The Moon Looked On, for example, we had travelled, my partner Marty and I, who's also my producer and bandmate, we travelled over to Vietnam the year before, and we'd found a music shop in Hanoi and just sat there all day playing these instruments. There are a lot of music shops. This one was particularly sweet. The owner of this shop was quite an accomplished musician herself, and she knew a lot about the instruments, and her English was a lot better than our Vietnamese, and she was able to kind of teach us a lot just in that one day. And we ended up kind of, blowing our entire recording budget basically on buying instruments there and bringing them home. And they featured a lot. The dambao and all sorts of gongs featured a lot on The Moon Looked On, and I have no doubt that I may not have had the confidence or the I don't know, just what is it? It's just having the belief that that music is something that changes, and that when you're experimenting with music, one of the most fascinating things you can do is learn about someone else's music. And we do it. I'm always quite clear that we do this as beginners. We're not attempting to accomplish or master these instruments, which many people spend their whole lifetimes learning. It's pretty rudimentary, the way that we use these instruments, in the same way that a child might clang a saucepan and think that's music. But yeah, I think a lot of what I learnt back in Canada has influenced the way I like to create music now.
You mentioned Marty, who plays such an important role in your music. How does a working relationship work for you both in the studio? You're two different people to what you are around the house?
It's funny, our life has always been so intertwined with music. Before we were kind of where we are now, which is we're parents of 3 children together. For the first 5 years of our knowing each other, we were bandmates in a band called Red Raku.
Yeah.
And that was our first way of communicating with each other, was through music, and that was our primary introduction to each other, and where our friendship really started before it became the big fat love affair. So when we're in the studio, it's very comfortable for us, and it's kind of quite peaceful for us too, because everyday life is pretty chaotic. So when we actually get to be in there together, and we've roped our mother-in-law or mother in to be with the kids, and we just get to kind of hang out and work on ideas, it's amazing for us. So we do love it. And I've had to just a lot of the time trust his instincts over the years, and other times we're able to work much more closely. So when often I'll write the songs, bring them to Marty, bring them to the band, play them, and really allow their musicianship to shine through all of those songs. So the 3 albums that we've done with the feeding set, what you're hearing there is a real collaboration with a group of people who have been free to express their ideas in there and made an incredible contribution along the way. And Marty, on any one track, is probably playing 2/3 of the instruments, and that's the way it's always been.
You received great acclaim after your first album and an aria after your second. Was it difficult not to be overwhelmed at the time by all the praise at such still an early stage in your solo career?
Sorry, ask me that question again. I think I missed a part of it. Sorry.
There was a lot of acclaim for your first record, and you're winning awards out by the time of your second record. Was it difficult not to be overwhelmed at that time by all the universal praise being heaped upon your work at such an early stage of your solo career?
I think it never feels like universal praise when you're sitting there with your own insecurities and so on. I think it was certainly incredibly encouraging because, particularly with Autumnbone, the kind of support that we got just early on from community radio and from people who bothered to come back to the second shows, and those kind of things were actually, to be frank, quite overwhelming, or just unexpected, because that album and most, my albums are kind of made in isolation, really. So to put it out there and to have it received so warmly encouraged me to continue on with it. I still wasn't sure whether what I was meant to do with my life. Was I meant to make music? Was I meant to write? Was I meant to stay at home full time and mother my child? Was I meant to make radio documentaries, which was my other area of interest? I didn't know where I would go with that. So that encouraged me early on to start thinking of myself as a musician, really. But in the meantime, as I said, you're always just kind of trying to get over your own shit, really, when you're creating art. So you don't believe it so much when people say nice things. So
you're a harsh critic of your own work? Do you mark yourself?
I certainly am. Yeah. I think I am. And that's not, for me, that's been part of the creative processes, and also probably part of, the university process of surviving a creative arts degree, is that you are forced to be critical of yourself. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, obviously I'm not so critical of myself that I'm paralysed. I can always continue to make the music, but I think you do need to have some degree of ability to cop flack from yourself and from others, and use that, if you can, to try and improve on your work.
I always felt your music was one that a type of music that thrives on a close connection with your audience. And as your audience has grown and you've played to larger crowds, has it been difficult, or have you taken any steps to maintain that intimacy?
The last tour was a tour called the Winter Secrets Tour, and I decided after kind of 4 or 5 years of touring with the feeding set that they'd earned a bit of a break. And we'd been playing, to progressively larger crowds, particularly because we were always, fortunate enough to support bands who were a lot bigger than we were. So we kept being exposed to these large crowds. And then what I decided to do to help me connect back with the core crowd of ours was to go on this tour called the Winter Secrets Tour. And one of the ideas behind this was I had I've always enjoyed the random experience of singing with strangers, and also in encouraging people to start thinking about music as at least as important as sport to communities, and at least as important as watching telly, that it's just this everyday kind of thing that's actually a pretty handy skill to have, and that most people can enjoy it. So I started this competition called the Winter Secrets Competition. I encouraged people from every city in Australia that I was touring to, there were 21 cities, to send me a version of one of my songs called Your Other Hand. So I got to choose from each city a number of people who would come up on stage with me that night. Now, I hadn't ever met them before, and I would play through the song with them once in sound check, and then the time would come on the fourth song of the set, they would get up on stage and play with me, whether they had them, some of them had Casios, some were singing backing vocals, there was viola, there was trumpet, there was guitar, there was melodica, everything that you could think of. And that was one of the best things I've ever done in my life, because for me that made the experience so special, and also drew in people from those communities, places like Castlemaine, and everywhere from Adelaide to Perth to Brisbane. Just, it was a really lovely way to do things and to connect back with kind of, the rooms were quite small, only 500 or, maybe 1,000 people at the corner at the most.
Yeah.
And, it was just gorgeous for me. So they've always, I'm pretty close to the people who come to our shows. They know that they can always come up and say hi to me, and I always love when they do. So that's a part of what's, keeps things fun for me too.
When you're writing for a new record, for a new album, do you like to write with a thematic feel in mind? Do you like to create a theme for a record, or rather that than just a collection of random songs?
What does tend to happen with my albums is that a theme does emerge somewhere in the writing process. I'm one of these writers who's not a perfectionist at the beginning at all. I'll write, 50 or 100 songs, of which there might only be a couple of strands that make sense, and then re-listen to all of them and pick out the ones that make sense. And I found, for example, on the most obvious example of that is probably on What Was Left, where I had a pretty intense couple of years with a lot changing in my life, and I just started writing at 4 a.m. in the morning. I couldn't sleep, and over the course of a couple of months ended up having a whole heap of different songs really based around the theme of grief. And that then became the songs that we brought into the album and were able to tie together. That's probably one of the clearer examples of how that works.
What do you see as the most important aspect of your writing? Which element of writing do you labour over the most?
The words, I guess, really. For me, the melodies come easily, and the arrangements, Marty's always helping in that way. So I don't personally labour over... the thing that I labour over the most is most definitely the words. Yeah. And ironically, that's usually the thing that most people ignore. I heard Paul Kelly say that once, that he was tired of spending time on words that he said it in a funny way, so I won't try and rephrase it because I'll end up making it sound wrong. But yeah, that's the thing that really I spend hours and hours and hours on.
Mm. So a lot of fine tuning.
Yeah, a lot of fine tuning and playing around with tempo, and different words, different ways of saying things. I saw Leonard Cohen play recently, and just you can't help but feel like a novice when you hear someone as incredible as that, who has such an incredible grip on what to leave out. Every word that he says and the way that he says it is just so powerful. Mm. And with all, a lot of the songwriters that I admire, Patti Smith and Laurie Anderson, Woody Guthrie, and they're people who know how to use their voices and tell stories, really.
You have in the past been a recipient of government art council grants. What is it? How stringent a process is that to go through? And at the time, how important was that funding for you?
I'm an incredibly passionate believer of the importance of arts funding in keeping society in a position where they're able to express themselves without worry of what's going to sell and what's going to be popular. So I think arts funding allows artists the chance to tell the truth about what they see and feel. And often, like in my own experience, arts funding was absolutely imperative for our early career. We would have had no chance of recording Autumn Bone if it hadn't have been for quite a small amount of money, comparatively small amount of money that we were given by the Music for the Future program, which was an Arts Fix program. And again, with what was left, we also received funding, and we've received funding over the years for touring as well. So the early grants were written by Marty and myself, and they were fairly stringent, but I think the trick is always this, that you have to have the music there and realise that that's the most important thing. They're listening, when you're applying for a grant, they're listening to the music, and then if they are hearing something that they think is significant, then they're going back to the application itself to just check that everything's in order, that you've got a budget that makes sense and that you've got some knowledge of what you're doing and that that money isn't going to be wasted. So if you can think about it from that point of view, that you're trying to convince people that you're going to use their money well, then it's not so daunting. But yeah, I just think it's absolutely central to allowing new voices through, because otherwise what are we relying on? We're relying on commercial radio, which, I love a lot of songs that are very, very popular songs, and I have over the years. But I think if we're relying on that to be all that we hear, then we're in a whole lot of trouble.
When you moved across to a major label, how mindful were you of making sure you still maintained good control over your work?
It started for us, this kind of discussion of how we would release our album started for us before we released Autumn Bone. And we had realised that the only way what we wanted to do was be able to release our music, make our music ourselves and release it any way we wanted. I think it was 2005, we were approached by lots of record companies early on, and nothing that they were offering was really interesting to us because it meant a level of compromise. But in 2005, John O'Donnell, who's the head of EMI at the time, came and saw a show of mine at a small pub in Sydney called the Hopeton. And basically what happened was he decided that we could be his little love project and he would give us the kind of deal that we wanted. And we didn't believe that at first, so we made an extraordinary list of demands, including the fact that we wanted to license our albums. Well, that means we wanted to create them independently. And what had always been a bit of a pain for me was this dealing with this notion of I love making the music, but getting it out there in the world, getting it at the shops and marketing it was really, for me, not the most exciting part of the process at all. So what EMI offered us was a chance to make our albums independently, and they would take over the business side of things, which was pretty attractive, and they would also allow us to they pretty much gave us free rein. So that's why we were able to go with a record company. And it was with a lot of thought that we did that too, because we wanted to make sure that we knew that we'd set a strong example as being independent artists, and we wanted to continue being independently thinking artists. And we didn't want to disappoint anyone who'd travelled along with us that journey so far. So we kind of did a lot of soul searching, a lot of thinking about it, and then realised that that was one of the few ways we were going to be able to continue making music at that stage in our career, because we were then a touring band. We had a full band, and we had a lot of, we had a family as well who we were taking on the road with us. So I think that allowed us the opportunity to continue making the kind of music in the way we wanted, which was to take our time and do it with thought.
Yeah.
So for us, it was a positive thing, but I wouldn't say that our experience with record companies was, there are a lot of different stories and different people with different tales about their experiences there. But I think because of the times we lived in, we were able to go in with our eyes wide open and with a pretty open relationship with them about how we would do things.
The mix of parenthood and a music career, how long has it taken to master that art form?
I hope I didn't give the impression that I'd mastered it in any way, shape or form. Marty and I now have identical twins, Oscar and Elijah, who are 2, wow. And we have Asher, who's 6. So, again, we have a pretty full load in that way, but it's the only way we've ever done it. I wasn't a touring musician before I was a mother, and it's just kind of pretty normal in how we do things. I don't believe in this notion of balance. I think a lot of women and men trick themselves into thinking that there's some perfect balance that you can get to when you're trying to be a working parent. I think there are special challenges for parents who are artists, and I think there are even more things to consider when you're a woman who's an artist and a mother. A friend of mine, a neighbour of mine, Rachel Power, recently kind of took on that idea. She's a writer, and she decided to interview about 17 or maybe even 27, a whole chunk of Australian artists who are also mothers, so female artists. And that was a really wonderful book. She interviewed me as part of that, but also a whole heap of other women, from Joanna Murray Smith to Sarah Tomasetti to Rachel Griffith to, women from all over. Yeah, that was a great comfort for me to read other women's experiences of what it is to try and create this, to have these twin passions of motherhood and wanting to create art, and how they're both part of the same urge, really. They're both passionate urges, but they're things that women 100 years ago were not even able to think about pursuing. So it's still pretty radical stuff, really. And we're also living in a crazy time where we're kind of obsessed with this ridiculous notion of celebrity mothers, which I find are really disturbing. And I think that this, reading about this book and starting to speak with other women who are doing a similar thing has been really eye-opening for me.
I read you quoted on your website saying that you regard touring as a musical privilege and one that you never take for granted. Do you think there are performers who do get that way?
Take touring for granted?
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of performers who get very tired on the road. We never tour to the point of exhaustion, and that's probably because, that's part of the parameters that you set up around being a family who tour together. You have rest days, or you have, we tour for 4 days of the week and then come home or so on. There are a lot of bands who, for all sorts of circumstances, are really forced to have a hellish life on the road. And what the kind of sacrifices that certain bands have to make in order to just make a living does really break your heart. So I don't stand in judgment of people who whinge about the touring life, but for me, it's just the best. I just love it, really.
And just before I let you go, Claire, what are the plans for the new record? What are we aiming for there?
Well, I'd say with the new record, to just be prepared for something different, because it will be the first time we'll be drawing in other producers along with Marty and myself. And it's probably an album that I've written on different instruments, including piano and my ever-trusty Casio. And I have been in Berlin after all. I've picked up a few different influences. So we'll start recording in the coming months, and I think we'll start releasing a bit of it late this year or early next year. And I'm really excited. I never wanted to be one of these artists who have 3 of their albums and the next 7 are kind of quite similar. I like yeah, I've kind of pushed myself in a new direction with this next one, and I guess we'll see. It's always a risk, and we'll see how it goes. But the main thing is that we're going to have a kind of bit more of an adventure in the studio this time. We're really going to take our time with recording it.
Fantastic. Well, we'll look forward to that. Each record a new chapter for you.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Hey, Claire, thanks for your time. Much appreciated.
It's a pleasure.
And
Thank
great
you.
catching up with you. Welcome home. It's great to have you back home again.
Great to be home. It's pretty crazy time to be home, but I'm just glad I'm here.
We'll look forward to seeing you around the traps.
Thank you, John.
Best of luck with the new recording.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
I'll need that. Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.